I am often accused of being a prophet of doom, but today I want to offer a path forward. I want to offer America's last hope. The reality is grim. The grand strategy that the United States pursued for the last 30 years, which I call liberal hegemony, is dead. It has failed catastrophically. The idea that we could remake the world in our own image, spread democracy at the barrel of a gun, and create a peaceful end of history, has been refuted by the rise of a powerful Russia, the emergence of a peer competitor in China, and a disastrous 2 decades of unwinnable wars in the Middle East. The world is unraveling, and the American hyperpower that emerged victorious from the Cold War is now weakened, distracted, and strategically exhausted. This situation is not sustainable. We are heading toward imperial overstretch and inevitable decline. I believe there is still time, but barely. We must immediately discard the ideology that has blinded us, abandon the crusade that has bled us dry, and return to the cold, hard logic of realism. My strategy, which I call offshore balancing and restraint, is not a retreat. It is a necessary strategic course correction. It is a call for a responsible, focused, and efficient use of American power, designed purely to ensure our survival and prosperity in the dangerous multipolar world that our liberal fantasies helped create. This documentary is my final and most urgent plea. It is a plea for strategic sanity. It is a plea for us to stop being the world's policeman and start acting like a strategically wise great power before our decline becomes irreversible. We must shed the costly burdens of the past and focus our finite resources on the existential threats of the future. The first step in adopting a new strategy must be a brutally honest assessment of the old one. We must face the reckoning, the catastrophic costs of the world's policeman strategy. The costs of liberal hegemony, the strategy of global dominance and perpetual intervention, are staggering and have become strategically crippling. Firstly, there is the cost in blood and treasure. We have spent trillions of dollars, money that should have built schools and infrastructure at home, on nation-building projects in faraway lands like Iraq and Afghanistan that were doomed to fail. Secondly, there is the cost in strategic credibility. We invaded Iraq on false pretenses, violated international law, and repeatedly ignored the warnings of our own allies. This hypocrisy severely damaged our moral authority and proved to the world that our rules-based order was a mere slogan for American power. Crucially, the biggest cost is strategic diversion. For 2 decades, our resources, our best military minds, and our entire foreign policy apparatus were obsessed with counterinsurgency doctrine and terrorism. We were fighting shadows in the desert. This disastrous fixation on the Middle East provided a 20-year strategic gift to our true peer competitor, China. The Chinese Communist Party could not have planned a better scenario. They watched as the American hyperpower willingly bled itself dry, tying itself down in unwinnable land wars and squandering its unipolar moment. While we were focused on building democracy in Kabul, Beijing was building its industrial base, its military, and its technological supremacy. The strategy of being the world's policeman forced us into global social engineering, which failed morally, failed financially, and failed strategically. The central finding of my analysis is that the massive cost and the resulting imperial overstretch have severely degraded our ability to perform our real job, preventing the rise of a hegemon in Europe or Asia. Any successful future strategy must begin by immediately shedding these historical and ideological burdens. The crisis of our current foreign policy demands a structural alternative. That alternative is rooted in a fundamental redefinition of our grand strategy, offshore balancing and restraint. To embrace this strategy, we must first internalize the logic of survival. Offshore balancing starts with the acceptance of the enduring principles of realism. The world is anarchic, great powers seek survival by maximizing power, and security is scarce. We must abandon the liberal fantasy that the world is a friendly place and accept that it is a world of continuous competition. What, then, is offshore balancing? It is a strategy of profound restraint that leverages America's unique geographical advantages. I argue that the United States is the ultimate regional hegemon, protected by 2 massive oceans and possessing complete security in our own hemisphere. This is a strategic advantage no other power enjoys. Our goal, therefore, is not to police the world, but to ensure that no other great power achieves a similar regional dominance in Europe or Asia. To execute this, we must remain offshore. We use our power, primarily our naval and air forces, not for occupation, but for deterrence. We push the burden of defense onto local powers, giving them the necessary aid and weapons to balance a rising threat, like China. We only commit our forces directly when the local balance is about to collapse and a hostile hegemon is on the verge of emerging. This strategy is efficient, focused, and, most importantly, sustainable. It saves American blood, conserves American treasure, and focuses our strategic attention on the two vital regions that truly matter to our survival. It is the strategy of a smart, self-aware great power, not a weary, ideologically driven empire. To correctly apply offshore balancing, we must establish a clear, uncompromising filter for intervention. This is the realist litmus test, preventing hegemons in Europe and Asia, and nothing else. My test is simple and direct. Does the problem affect the balance of power in a way that could lead to the emergence of a peer competitor capable of challenging our security in the Western Hemisphere? If the answer is no, we do not intervene. If the answer is yes, we intervene with maximum efficiency. This test immediately and decisively excludes our past commitments. The conflicts in the Middle East, in Africa, in Latin America, and in parts of Southeast Asia are distractions. They are tragic, yes, but they are not strategically vital. No state in those regions has the industrial, demographic, or military capacity to project power across the globe and threaten the United States. Therefore, our involvement in those regions beyond counterterrorism and diplomacy is a waste of resources. The litmus test forces us to focus solely on the two regions that matter, Europe and Asia. The rise of a hegemon in either of these theaters would fundamentally change the global balance of power and place the United States in a position of perpetual, intense insecurity. Our entire grand strategy must be subordinated to this single objective. This simple, structural test strips away the ideological clutter of democracy promotion and human rights crusades, replacing them with a sober, hard-headed assessment of American survival. This clarity is precisely what our foreign policy has lacked for 3 decades, and it is the only way to escape the trap of imperial overstretch. The application of offshore balancing to our current, most dangerous threat, China, requires the pivot to Asia, using local powers to contain China. Our past strategy of engagement, which was a catastrophic miscalculation built on the liberal fantasy that economic growth would lead to democracy, has failed. We helped create a peer competitor. Now, we must contain it intelligently. My strategy for containment is not one of massive, forward-deployed American armies, that is too expensive and provocative. Instead, we must leverage the local powers who are most terrified of Chinese regional hegemony. These states are Japan, South Korea, Australia, India, Vietnam, and the Philippines. My strategy requires the U.S. to act as the ultimate strategic enabler. We must become the arsenal of the balancing coalition. We should provide sophisticated weapons, intelligence, and diplomatic support to these nations, helping them to build robust militaries capable of checking Chinese power in their own waters. We must encourage them to increase their defense spending and forge stronger security ties with each other. Our own forces, our powerful naval fleet, our advanced air force, and our submarine technology, remain offshore, over the horizon. We serve as the deterrent of last resort, the ultimate guarantee that China will not prevail. This approach minimizes American casualties, maximizes strategic efficiency, and places the burden of containment on the states that have the most at stake. It replaces costly, ideological occupation with efficient, focused deterrence, and is the only sustainable way to manage the coming conflict with China. The application of offshore balancing to our second major regional challenge, Russia, is just as crucial as the pivot to Asia. This requires us to impose the European burden, why Europe must handle Russia, the end of NATO expansion. For decades, the wealthy, populous, and technologically advanced states of Western Europe have been free-riding on American security. They enjoy the benefits of American protection against a Russian threat that is geographically far closer to them than to us. This is a structural absurdity. Europe's combined GDP is far greater than Russia's. Germany, France, and Italy possess all the resources and industrial capacity necessary to build a conventional military strong enough to deter Russia on their own continent. But they have not done so, because American largesse, our commitment to maintaining hundreds of thousands of troops, our advanced air power, and our constant involvement in their local security disputes, has allowed them to shirk this responsibility. My strategy of restraint demands that we end this subsidy. We must transition Europe to genuine self-reliance. This means significantly drawing down our ground forces stationed in Europe and making it unequivocally clear that the burden of conventional deterrence against Russia now falls to Berlin, Paris, and Warsaw. Furthermore, the single most dangerous policy in Europe, NATO expansion, must end. I have argued that the expansion of NATO was the primary cause of the war in Ukraine. Our future goal should be to stabilize, not escalate. We must clearly define the boundaries of the alliance, reassuring Russia that we have no intention of absorbing Ukraine or Georgia. This necessary step removes the existential threat that Russia perceives and creates the conditions for a stable, albeit competitive, balance of power on the European continent. Our ultimate interest is not in policing Eastern Europe, it is in preventing Russia from dominating the region. By forcing the capable European powers to take the lead, we free up our own immense resources to focus on the truly existential threat gathering in the Pacific. We must recognize that the era of American security dependence is over for Europe. The continent is capable of defending itself, and our grand strategy requires that it finally does so. This strategic shedding of commitments must apply to the region where we have suffered the most severe strategic overreach, ending the quagmire, why we must withdraw from the Middle East. I have already detailed the staggering costs of our continued presence in the Gulf, the trillions of dollars wasted, the lives lost, and the strategic diversion that gifted China 2 decades of unchallenged growth. Offshore balancing offers the immediate solution to this perpetual crisis, complete and responsible withdrawal. The Middle East, for the United States, contains no vital security interests. The oil justification is dead. The democratic crusade is dead. The sole strategic calculation remaining is ensuring that the chaos created by our past interventions does not create new, catastrophic threats. But I argue that our presence is the single greatest cause of the regional instability and anti-American sentiment that fuels terrorism. To end the threat, we must remove the primary catalyst. This requires us to transition immediately to an over-the-horizon counterterrorism and intelligence posture. We must close our large, vulnerable, and provocative ground bases. We must allow the regional powers, Iran, Turkey, Israel, and Saudi Arabia, to manage their own complex, local balance of power. My critics will scream that we are leaving a vacuum. I argue that the vacuum will quickly be filled by local powers who will be forced to act responsibly and hedge against each other. Iran and Saudi Arabia will be compelled to negotiate a local détente, as we have already seen them attempt. The regional balance will self-regulate. Continuing to stay is merely a policy of self-sabotage, draining resources that are desperately needed to meet the challenge posed by Beijing. The most efficient strategy for the American homeland is a strategic retreat from the Middle East. It is a necessary act of strategic sobriety. I am aware that many in Washington will attempt to smear this strategy of restraint by labeling it isolationism. This is a deeply dishonest and intellectually lazy attempt to cling to the failed status quo. I reject the term outright. Offshore balancing is not isolationism. Isolationism means withdrawing entirely, pulling up the drawbridges, and ignoring the world's power dynamics. Isolationism leads to catastrophic outcomes, as it did when the United States failed to intervene until the very last moment in the 1930s, allowing hostile hegemons to gain unstoppable strength in Europe and Asia. My strategy is the exact opposite. Offshore balancing is a form of selective engagement. It is a deeply internationalist strategy that leverages our unique geography. We do not ignore the world, we engage with it intelligently, focusing our resources only on the vital interests that affect our survival. My strategy requires that we maintain the most powerful naval and air forces in the world. It requires active intelligence gathering, continuous diplomatic maneuvering, and the establishment of powerful balancing coalitions across 2 continents. We are merely replacing the inefficient and costly tactic of occupation with the efficient and focused tactic of deterrence. We replace the burden of global policing with the precision of strategic balancing. The difference is clear. The liberal isolationist, by seeking to disengage entirely, creates chaos. The liberal interventionist, by seeking to engage everywhere, creates imperial overstretch. The realist, by seeking selective engagement and restraint, creates the conditions for sustainable American security and success. My critics use isolationism as a scare word to defend the failed policies of the last 30 years. It is time we recognize this rhetorical trick for what it is. The ultimate justification for abandoning liberal hegemony and adopting offshore balancing and restraint is the imperative of strategic efficiency, saving blood, treasure, and focus. Every dollar, every soldier, and every strategic thought is a finite resource. For decades, we have been wasting these resources on tertiary interests, while the existential threat gathered strength. Offshore balancing provides quantifiable, profound strategic gains. Firstly, the consolidation of resources. By withdrawing from non-vital commitments in the Middle East and transitioning Europe to self-reliance, we immediately free up hundreds of billions of dollars annually. This money can be redirected to research and development for next-generation naval technology, cyber defenses, and AI, the true battlegrounds against China. Secondly, the reduction of risk. By removing our troops from permanent garrisons in unstable regions, we eliminate the primary catalyst for anti-American terrorism and drastically reduce the risk of being dragged into small, local wars that have no bearing on our national security. Thirdly, the focus of strategic elite. Our best strategic minds will no longer be forced to waste their time on counterinsurgency doctrine and nation-building fantasies. They will be free to focus their collective attention entirely on the greatest challenge of our time, the containment of a rising China. This strategic efficiency is not a luxury, it is a necessity. We can no longer afford to waste resources on ideological crusades. We must become the most efficient, ruthless, and focused great power on the planet, concentrating our power on the few places that truly matter. This efficiency is the key to enduring the competition of the 21st century. This brings me to the final conclusion, and my last appeal, the choice between strategic sanity and imperial decline. My entire analysis, from the failure of liberal hegemony to the necessity of offshore balancing, rests on a single, tragic truth: the iron laws of great power politics are immutable. The world is anarchic. States seek survival. And great powers will always compete. We spent 30 years trying to deny this reality, believing we could remake the world through hope and good intentions. That experiment has failed. The cost has been catastrophic: a resurgent Russia, a formidable China, endless war, and a shattered reputation. The choice before the American establishment is clear and urgent. We can continue down the path of ideological delusion, the path of liberal hegemony, the path of imperial overstretch, which guarantees our eventual exhaustion and decline. Or, we can choose the path of strategic sanity. We can choose the cold, hard wisdom of realism. We can embrace restraint. We can shed our unnecessary burdens. We can focus our finite power on securing our own hemisphere and intelligently balancing our rivals. This is the only path that offers a sustainable future for the United States. My theory offers no happy ending, it offers no universal peace. But it offers clarity and the only sober strategy for navigating a tragic world. We must stop being the world's policeman and become the offshore balancer. The hour is late, and the margin for error has vanished. The future of the American Republic depends on our immediate acceptance of this structural reality and our choice to finally act like a strategically wise great power.